This is Wayward Radio, your official source for news and information on the Wayward Realms. Greetings, fellow wanderers, and welcome to Wayward Radio, your ultimate gateway of untold stories, hidden lore, and the latest updates from OnceLost Games' epic creation, the Wayward Realms. I'm Joe, your host and fellow explorer, ready to guide you through the world of mystery, magic, and mayhem. From concept, execution, gameplay, AI, and lore, we've discussed much so far in our first season of this podcast, but we've yet to touch upon art direction. Now, today, dear listener, we dive into what the Wayward Realms will look like, from where it draws its inspirations and why. From weapons, armor, clothing, and buildings to environmental storytelling and the technology helping to achieve that. How does OnceLost Games define the look for a whole world? How will the Wayward Realms differentiate itself visually from the plethora of RPGs that are available? These are but a few of the questions we'll endeavor to answer on our journey toward the truth. And joining us tonight in our adventuring party is Victor, creative producer of the Wayward Realms.
Very glad to be back. I must say it's come to my understanding that Blake bribed our editor to find a way to sneak himself into the last episode. But darn it, now I will be ahead.
Glad to have you back, Victor. Welcome, welcome. Also, we want to introduce to you Kai, our art director for the Wayward Realms. Kai, welcome to the show.
Hello. Glad to be here. Also glad that nobody has snuck into the show, that it's just those of us who are intended to be here discussing art.
Kai's coming to us all the way from East Asia. What time is it over there right now?
It is currently 8:20 a.m. Earlier than I am usually awake, but
bright
awake
and early.
I am. Yeah,
Wow.
bright and early.
Bright and early. Well, thanks for coming on, Kai. Really appreciate you taking the effort to be here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Eugenia, tech artist of the Wayward Realms, is here as well. Welcome, Eugenia, to the show.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. So, Kai and Eugenia, I want to begin with you. Fill us in on what your roles are in creating art for the Wayward Realms. Let's start with Kai on that one.
All right. In carrying on the long tradition of art direction for every project, they are so different from one another that the title becomes almost meaningless because the type of things that you're trying to accomplish, the mediums you're working in, the technologies that you're using are just so completely different. And Wayward Realms is not only no exception, it's probably the most dramatic departure from anything else you could be an art director on. It's a project with huge ambitions that's trying to accomplish all sorts of things that there's not much of a blueprint for. So a lot of my responsibility comes down to figuring out exactly how to do that. How do we visually represent the world that the Wayward Realms wants to be able to express? And also, how does that translate into the art itself, the things that people encounter, the things that they see, and how do you manage all of the technology that makes that possible?
Looking forward into digging into some of that. But one of the first things I want to ask you, Kai, is how did you come to be involved in the project?
So I actually had it recommended to me as something that I might be interested in, like wish listing on Steam or just following in general, by a friend in my first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons group.
And AD&D.
Yes, indeed.
Wow.
Yeah, and after looking into it, not only was I interested in the game itself, I was really curious about how they were going to achieve a lot of the things that they planned to. And that sort of goes into my own personal background, like my work history. I am really interested in these sort of huge problems that don't really have a solution. So to go into that just a little bit,
Please.
Yeah, I guess I wrote my first lines of code when I was 7 years old, and I probably drew stick figures and finger painted a little bit before that. But of all the things that I got involved in, those were the two things that stuck with me. So I was an engineer professionally for about a decade and a half, and a tech artist professionally for a little bit, about half that time. And so I've been working in both of those worlds and tried to always aim towards these problems that push the boundaries in places that I could actually work in. So working with massive data sets. Without going into it too much, I did work at Google briefly. I left because I had ethical objections about what they were doing almost immediately. But the experience of working, in databases that have hundreds of billions or possibly trillions of rows and figuring out how to do all of that in semi-real time is the kind of stuff that I really enjoy working on. So when the Wayward Realms came upon my sort of awareness as a project that was out there, it was like, okay, this is not only an amazing art project that combines a lot of things that I'm interested in, they're also trying to work on a lot of things and solve a lot of problems that I also am fascinated by from a technical perspective. So I sent an email, reached out, said I was really interested to help in basically any way that I could, even if it was just to have a few conversations from time to time, if they didn't already have a bunch of people with solutions to all the stuff that they were working on. We had a couple of conversations, and then shortly after I joined the project.
And if I may cut in here, when we did receive that email from Guy, me and Kyle reviewed, and I told Kyle, well, either this guy is completely overqualified or he's just straight up lying due to his very lovely resume that he has. Luckily, he's just overqualified.
Well, maybe I was overqualified at the time, but I would say I'm now struggling to keep up with how the scope of our ambitions have expanded, which is a wonderful place to be in.
Kai, I really love the fact that you brought up AD&D, and I have a feeling that some of the AD&D art is possibly an inspiration here going into some talking points we'll hit on later on. But just totally geeking out over the AD&D influence. I mean, I love D&D myself. I enjoy 5th edition, 3rd edition. Never had a chance to play AD&D, but would love to talk to you about that some more in a few minutes. But first, I want to jump over to Kai, our tech artist here at the Wayward Realms. Kai, fill us in on your role here for the Wayward Realms. What is it? To quote one of the Bobs, what is it you do here? Eugenia, yeah, I'm very sorry.
I mean, technically it's correct because our dear art director is still doing a lot of tech art.
So
yeah, because to clarify, I'm a tech artist specifically on the character team. And in preparation to explain to people what that means, I realized that my what I do in my job coincides with what the necromancer does. I chop people up into pieces and make them move again. I control a lot of skeletons, and the malleable flesh of my subjects is my canvas.
You can see why we brought her on.
So it's modular characters, rigging, materials, texturing.
I really love this. That is hilarious at how like close that actually is. Oh my gosh. That is awesome. Okay. I mean, can you give us a little bit more on that? I mean, other than, bringing the dead pixels back to life, do you do like, weapons, armor? Do you do any of that stuff as well?
Well, that's the thing. I'm a bit of glue between the teams because we have artists. I'm not doing the weapons. I have been involved in the armor. I have done a lot of costume work, integrating stuff other people have done. I'm helping both the artists and the programmers that it's easier for them to, use the 3D that we make. And lately I've been working a lot on NPCs, on the visual side of them.
I asked Kai what brought him to the project. So Eugenia, I want to ask you the same thing. What brought you to the project? But also, what I really want to know on top of that is, how did you get involved in tech art? So Eugenia, what brought you to the project, and how did you get involved in tech art?
All right, I'm doing my best to not become an unskippable cutscene. Because that's it has a potential, but okay. Why I joined the project first? My lifelong, I've played RPGs. I've played lots of video games, and some of my favorite games are, for example, Baldur's Gate 2, Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, Final Fantasy 7 and 8.
Wow.
Yeah, it's RPGs, and you can probably also kind of triangulate my age. Anyways, I wanted to find a way to, like, hey, I've consumed all these great RPGs, I've played them, I love them. I would like to work on a big RPG myself to just put it forward so that other people that come after me also have great RPGs to play. And I was just thrilled when I got discovered. I was a concept artist at the time that I joined Wayward Realms, and I thought I'd actually be doing concept art for buildings and help give the cities certain looks. But over time, a certain art director who's on us with this call told me, well, Eugenia, why don't you try sculpting? And I was like, sculpting a face? Sculpting a head has nothing to do with environment concept art. And the next day I come back with a beginner sculpt, but it went surprisingly well. And I asked Kai, how did you know that? And I never got an answer because it's art director magic. And from then on, it's just kind of snowballed. And I first thought, well, okay, so apparently I can do a little bit of 3D. And then I got really curious in Unreal and realized, oh, it's not that scary. I can do like a little bit of blueprints now, and like, okay, it's actually pretty awesome. And then at some point, there was this turning point where I changed. It was something really small, like I changed the compression on the texture, and Kai told me, slow down. This is tech art stuff. And I was like, I don't think I can be stopped at this point. And I just kept going.
Just a snowball moving down the hill. Watch out, folks. Here comes Eugenia. That's great. I love that story. I love how Kai sort of like recognized the talent and inspired you to that. I wish everyone had leadership like that in their lives, in their professional lives. And that's really beautiful that this is sort of the leadership that we have over at OnceLost Games. Really, really great. And kudos to you, Kai, for the inspiration there. That's awesome.
Well, I can't take full credit for that. I mean, first of all, there's the fact that Eugenia is incredibly naturally talented at tech art, and which is a crazy thing to be naturally talented at. It's probably one of the most tedious and like rigorous of the 3D art disciplines, and it's not one that I would recommend that most people undertake unless you're really interested in getting into the like nuts and bolts of how 3D stuff works. But a lot of that comes from Julian. And Julian really impressed upon me the couple of times that I was fortunate enough to work alongside him, that the team that's around you is so much more talented and so much more capable than you realize. And you may set out to start making a particular game, and it has a particular scope, and you have some certain ideas, but at some point you start to realize, or you should start to realize, in his words, that you really can change the whole landscape of what's out there. That, the world of games is such a new medium. Like, books have existed for so much of recent human history, like so much of civilization, and yet we're still pushing boundaries there. Video games are a field of mostly untapped potential, and it's our job to tap it. And it's the people around you who have that capability. They all have the ability to find those things, to move and change the world of this medium that we work in. And so since some of those conversations, I mean, basically that's the question that I ask not only myself, but every one of our team members that I'm fortunate enough to work with is essentially like, okay, we all know how to do the things that art school taught us, that YouTube tutorials have educated us on, that, you know, training classes that we've taken have given us the ability to. What do we know how to do that nobody knows how to do? Because that's also in there.
Taking risks and taking chances and experimenting, you know, such a huge part of art, you know. And I feel like there's such a dearth of that these days, especially in Hollywood and in game studios. You know, I mean, how many more Call of Duty iterations do we need out there before someone decides to start taking a chance? You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so Kai, let's kind of get into this a little bit here. Tell us about your vision and the direction you're taking the art for the Wayward Realms. You know, I know you had mentioned earlier about AD&D. There's some, you know, at this point, I think we could say, you know, some of those historic artists from that era of Dungeons and Dragons, like Elmore and Parkinson and you know,
yeah,
I'm kind of drawing a blank now, but you know, they called them the Four Horsemen at the time. I'm sure they had an influence on you. Tell us a little bit about some of that direction you're taking the Wayward Realms.
Yeah, so this answer kind of comes in two parts. One is the technical aspect of things, and the other is the stylistic aspect. And like so many things, the stylistic aspect it's very easy to explain. I mean, you already pointed to most of it by referencing these artists, Larry Elmore and Keith Parkinson. But actually going through and implementing it and working out the details and getting it all to function the way that you intend is, of course, the hard part. And that's, you know, the execution is every single one of those brush strokes that you have to complete to a high enough degree that it's fitting for the game. So in general, in terms of vision, it's as much my vision as it is one that I inherited because it really belongs to the whole team, which is honestly, from an art direction standpoint, a rare and wonderful thing. I have worked on a number of projects where everybody has a very different idea of what it is that we're making. And, you know, you sort of work together as much as you struggle together, and then you come up with something that is, in the best case, the overlap of all of your interests and the things that you hoped for. And then usually it's better than the sum of its parts, hopefully, if you don't disagree too much in the process. Wayward Realms is not like that. Everybody pretty much shares a really well-aligned vision. You know, all of us have, drawing on Eugenia's introduction, for instance, this passion for, this interest in the world of RPGs as they once were. You know, when we talk about OnceLost games being called OnceLost games, all of us share pretty much the same feeling and understanding of what it is you would define as having been once lost in the world of gaming. So to draw that into our vision and the things that we're trying to do, first, there's kind of like the grand scope of things. Actually, before I get into this, for anybody who's listening, in addition to Larry Elmore and Keith Parkinson, there's three particular paintings, pieces of work that kind of, I think, are the best possible representation of our artistic goals here and where we're going. So if you have a chance, look these up while you're listening. The first is Eden to Empire by Cole Thomas. The second is Dragon Slayers and Proud of It by Larry Elmore. And the third, and probably the most important, is Accolade by Edmund Layton. And I'm going to talk about each of these here shortly. But first, let's talk about the technical aspect of this.
I'm familiar with the Elmore piece that you mentioned. Larry Elmore is my favorite artist from the AD&D era. So that piece of art, I'm very familiar with it, and I love it. But yeah, please continue.
Yeah, he's amazing. So actually, that's probably as good a place as any to jump in. Let's talk about that Elmore painting, Dragon Slayers. I'm proud of it. So first and foremost, a lot of when people approach graphics in games, as opposed to graphics and perhaps a more abstract or unusual like project that just happens to use 3D art, the approach to it is often, okay, well, how do we get as showy, as flashy, as magnificent of graphics as we possibly can and still maintain, like 30 frames per second on whatever the lowest hardware that we're targeting is. And that's really not the way that we approach solving the visual field in the Wayward Realms. I mean, we are inspired by and following in the footsteps of these very sort of realist centered artists that draw on a lot of oil painting and a lot of classical art. But for example, my own personal favorite game aside from Daggerfall is a game called Caves of Cud, which essentially looks like you're running it in a terminal. It looks like you're writing code as much as you are playing a game. And I'm hugely looking forward to, a game by some of our contemporaries, Ardenfall, which I'm sure everybody who's listening to this is familiar with. And those games are magnificent. And, the graphics are just a way to allow you to understand what's happening in the gameplay. So with the Wayward Realms, the question is, how do you meet the imagination of the players halfway? And what is it that you're meeting at that halfway point? Because they have to, just like if you were playing a game of AD&D or you're playing one of these other games that I just mentioned, the goal is not to perfectly represent every single part of the world. What you want is to engage the imagination of the person who's interacting with the medium. And what we're trying to reinforce there is some central theme of the game world. And that's what the visuals of the game world need to continuously reinforce as you play. So if we talk about the painting, which I hope everybody listening is currently looking at, Dragon Slayers and Proud of It by Larry Elmore. Yeah. The thing that you see is, first of all, there's a group of adventurers and they're standing around this dragon that they have hunted. They don't look like they look like they're happy, but they also are somewhat like exhausted and a little bit injured. They did not have an easy time taking down this probably fairly young dragon. And they, despite being in this very high fantasy world, there's no moment when you look at this painting that they have lost their humanity. They look like people like you and me. They look like just they were in a community. There was a monster nearby. Maybe they didn't even know necessarily how to fight it. They were just the ones who were most capable in their area. Maybe they had a little bit of sword fighting skill, or it was a hobby, or they just had a weapon above their fireplace that they could contribute to the cause, whereas everybody else around them just had, farming tools. And so they were the ones who got the task. And they went, and it probably took them months, and they had to track this thing and deal with it and figure out what they were up against. But all of that high fantasy, all of that, the magic of the world, the fact that they're fighting a fantastical creature, a dragon, does not subtract from their very, very human nature. And that's the thing that we're trying to continuously reinforce. That's the halfway point where we meet the imagination of people who are playing the Wayward Realms.
That's the thing about Elmore is, I think you're keying onto something here, or pointing out something that's very specific to him versus some of the other some of his contemporaries at the time. Mm-hmm. Is he really was able to kind of portray that human realistic aspect to his art. Plus of course, if you look at the landscapes too, they're absolutely beautiful. The skies are always gorgeous.
Oh yeah,
in that too. So how specifically has Dragon Slayers and Proud of It, how has that kind of informed the direction that you want to go for the art in Wayward Realms?
Well, there's always the question of realism versus stylization when it comes to video game art. And how that informs things is that, first of all, you should have the experience that you are in a mundane, historically accurate medieval world, and yet simultaneously that world should have the possibility to become incredibly fantastic. There should be, the call to adventure available anywhere and everywhere. And first of all, this sort of gets into the technical side of things. There's just the size of the world. That does a lot of heavy lifting before you even fill it with stuff to go do. The fact that you know that it's going to take several hours to walk to whatever it is that you see in the distance in real time if you don't have a horse or some kind of fast travel method available to you already suggests that there's like a grand scape before you, and you get that feeling just as a player. So that's kind of the first thing. You mentioned the backgrounds, the environment that Larry Elmore does, and how beautiful and captivating they are. There's that. There's the first level of that, which is the things that are beyond you. They should always be rendered. They should always be visible. They should always be something that you can go see, go experience. Nothing is a backdrop. Nothing is, a skybox or a painting that's just off in the distance where the horizon ends. If you see it, you can go there. The second part. Yeah, please go ahead. The second part is that things that are fantastic are incredibly fantastic in the work of Larry Elmore, in the work of Keith Parkinson, Clyde Caldwell. When you see magic in their paintings, it is bright, it is otherworldly, it sets itself apart from the rest of the world. And in technical terms, that just means that we have two very different rendering techniques for how we handle these things. The world that you are in as a human being, where you're wearing armor and wielding a sword and wandering around, that world is rendered in a way that is very realistic, very approachable, very understandable. I mean, it's of course still computer graphics. You're not going to mistake it for the real world at any point, but it's as close as we can get with the technology that we have today and Unreal Engine 5. Mm-hmm. However, if you cast magic, if anything in the world breaks beyond that and goes into the fantastical, it is rendered completely differently. It is, it's, first of all, just in technical terms, it has way more saturation, way more glow and bloom and all of this than anything else that the real world would have. But beyond that, it's rendered in a way that makes it fluid or transparent or, reflective or all of these things that real world surfaces can't do, that you can only do in computer graphics.
All right. So I want to move on to Eugenia. And Eugenia, I want to ask specifically about technology and techniques that you're adopting to realize the art direction that Kai is kind of laying out for us. And Kai, I know you mentioned 3 paintings in total. I want to go back to the other 2 in just a few minutes. But we're getting a lot of information here about the groundedness, about the scope. And so, Eugenia, from the text side of things, what have you been adopting on your side to realize this art direction on specifically the groundedness of the art?
Yeah, that's that slides over into my field beautifully, because of course for the characters you will be meeting a lot of people, and it would be a shame if they all looked like the same 5 people. At the same time, if everyone has a wizard roll plus 10, you get numb to it, to the visual spectacle. And so we have to find a good balance between, everyone is kind of a peasant, or most people are. And when you meet someone fantastical, it's really fantastical, but it's not overwhelming and it's not too much on too many people. So therefore, we are, with the characters, with the costumes specifically, we're going for also divided into 2 approaches where we have mostly, imagine 90% just grounded clothing. You can clearly see it's medieval fantasy. It's somewhat believable. You could say maybe Italy, maybe 13th, 14th century. And then you have this 10% punch where it's like, okay. At the same time, it's like, you don't want to dismiss all the NPCs because you will probably be able to talk to everyone. You don't want to dismiss the people, so you have You have to give something that's 10%, and that's also like setting us apart. We chose to go for 80s, for an 80s influence, and it's also, again, like, we have to look at it in a nuanced way, because if I put neon makeup on everyone, it's like, it's not very subtle, it's not very fitting. But at the same time, it's also like, there were several subcultures in the 80s. There are more options than a celebrity that everyone remembers. There was heavy metal, there was gothic movement. There's a lot we can do. There was new wave. There is so much we can include, and it's even like, if you have a peasant with a slightly interesting hairstyle, it's like, wait a moment, you look twice.
Right. Big difference between Madonna and Tiffany in the 80s, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's also the beauty of it. If I could break everything down in maybe like even a mathematical formula, that wouldn't be very artistic anymore. So it's like a little bit a competition against yourself. You're like, how much can I push things until they become ridiculous again? I was like, yeah, not that way, Wayward. Okay, step back.
Yeah. Now, how does Unreal Engine support the current direction, Eugenia?
Yeah, so for my field with the characters, Unreal is amazing to work with for me. Unreal supports a lot of different approaches, so it's not like, oh, there is one way of doing things. You can basically, if you want to, make a character where all the textures are in one square, and it's like, it's very simple. It's like one mesh, one texture. Here we are. Or you can make it super duper expansive, and everything is 4K. And you have so many appendages to the character, and it's just amazing what scale is possible. And there's also within the character parts several different ways of doing things. So right now, for example, we're using hair cards, but there's other ways to create hair. Like it's just beautiful. And the thing again is, we have to find a balance of, well, we want to use Unreal. We want things to look high-end as we can do as a small team.
Sure.
But at the same time, like, yeah, we don't want to sacrifice performance. And again, it's also not supposed to be overwhelming again, because again, if we look like a movie, it's like, well, we still need the gameplay to come through, you know?
Right, exactly. Now, Victor and Kai, I'd like for you both to sort of answer this question in your own way, because I think the both of you are going to give some incredible answers here. Kai, specifically on maybe one of the other two paintings that you were talking about. I've heard, Eugenia brought this up, and I've heard about this before, about this 80s aesthetic that you guys want to add to the game. For me and for so many other folks, well, maybe not for me, but for so many other folks, they hear that and they're thinking, ripped Jordache jeans, Converse sneakers, are we going to be hearing Tiffany singing in the town square? I mean, what does that mean when you want to bring the 80s aesthetic, to the game? Victor and then Kai, please.
Well, I do the concept art, right? Like that's my role here in the art team. And funny enough, while I'm doing those concepts, I am listening to Tiffany and I am listening to Madonna and Hall & Oates and Springsteen and all the, like, I just try to immerse myself in that 80s style while I'm doing it. I don't know.
We're on Aja.
Yes. We're going to have to get Eric to do that cover for us. But yeah, it basically harkens back to, as far as the visuals go, to that sort of like AD&D style you see in these old designs, right? Where maybe like you get like some studded leathers and stuff like that on the armors, some nice broad swords, and like you mentioned, like the hair and stuff like that. Like that's where I really draw a lot of inspiration when I'm trying to get that kind of feeling into those concepts and getting that 80s style across. Before we had some concepts that like we tried to do a little bit of that, but I think we were kind of scared of diving too deep into that 80s style, and we kind of wound up getting a lot of comments of like the art just looking a little too generic, or people didn't really see that 80s influence. So we decided, I think it was like maybe like back in December or something like that. Like, let's go ahead and like really lean into it a lot more and get that, the big hair and and that studded leather, and let's not be afraid of that. Let's just go all in.
You're doing the big hair stuff.
We'll have some big hair.
That's amazing. That is so great. I don't know if anyone's ever noticed, but in my background over here, this is a very famous piece done by Dave Trampier for AD&D. This was actually done for the Dungeon Master's screen during the AD&D era, and it's I think it's called the Citadel and the Paladin, or the Paladin and the Citadel, something like that. I forget specifically the name for it, but this has always been a famous a favorite piece of mine, and comes directly from this era. And one of the things I like about it is like it's just super saturated colors, and it just screams, like when you look at it up close, it just screams 80s, and I'm kind of wondering, and maybe Kai, maybe you could pick this up, I know you mentioned 2 other paintings, maybe you could roll that in here too. Is that something that we can look forward to in the game with the color palette? How are you going to bring that 80s aesthetic into this?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things when it comes to keeping that sense of realism and making sure that we have our eye on who is a regular person that you could potentially be in this medieval world, that doesn't exclude the ability for people to express themselves, right? Like you look at 16th century and some of the people that were around and, the area that we now call Italy, and some of the outfits that they were wearing. I mean, even the commoners, there was a love of color and a willingness to wear all sorts of wild and flowing, expressive things. And so we can draw on a lot of what people were wearing in the 80s and how they were represented in a lot of this fantasy art. When you look at it, it doesn't necessarily look like these people aren't necessarily from this medieval world that they're supposed to be a part of. They look like they're a part of it. They just look very expressive. They look like they have style, and they have, some sense of caring about what they look like when they're not busy working on their farm or, making metal into whatever utility people in the town need. It's like having that capacity for people to have that sense of self-expression. I think it also goes a long way towards lending personalities to the people that you encounter. And again, this kind of dovetails with Eugenia's answer before, which is if you go into a town, and we have worked so hard to build all of this technology so it has a realistic population, and every single person in there is wearing the same 3 shades of brown tunic, that's not interesting. These people are not people that you would necessarily want to engage with or want to talk to. There's not really a reason to build out all of the technology to give them personalities and their own sets of stats and resolve them in this performant way and fight with the GPU so that we can have all of them be able to converse with you in ways that are unique. If you're just going to walk into town and think, there is no way that any one of these people have anything interesting to say or know anything about what I'm trying to do in the world, we could just render them as background characters that have one line of dialogue that randomly comes from a database that you click on. And that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to give these people, their own lives, their own interesting things. I mean, they're of course not as deep as the quote unquote main characters that you might encounter, but they still have more going on than, oh, you're just set decoration to make this town look like it has people.
I want to, Kai, that is absolutely phenomenal. And I want to highlight that point that you just made, because, to the passive listener, that might have gone unheard to some degree. What an amazing point. Why go through all of the hard work in ensuring that not only do you have a realistic population in a town, but that every one of those folks has their own stats and has their own going here and going there at certain times of the day. Why do that if you're not going to make them look like the individuals they're actually programmed to be? I mean, that really dovetails with a previous episode that we recorded on, where we did actually talk about every one of these NPCs does have their own stat block. And, so now Art steps in and says, all of these folks are individuals. They're programmed to be individuals. They've got their own stat blocks. You can interact with, this NPC in a wildly different way than the next NPC behind him walking around on the street. Let's show that visually. And what an amazing point that I think maybe the next person playing the game is not really going to think about. Like, I'm not an artist by any stretch of the imagination. I would never think of something like that. And it really is just a beautiful thing that a creative mind such as yours and Eugenia and of course Victor too can take a look at the technical aspect and say, here's how we're going to breathe life into it. Just absolutely phenomenal.
Well, hopefully all of these things tie together nicely. And that's kind of the big challenge that we're up against is, okay, we have these systems, we have these styles, we've got all of this, amazing artwork that Eugenia has been working on and other members of the art team have been working on. And we have these incredible systems that we can lean on. Now we have to get all of this to talk to each other. And that's sort of where the big challenge lies. And if I can get a little bit technical for just a second, one of the things that makes the problem space of the Wayward Realms so interesting is that video games, aside from trying to achieve really, really profound graphics, which they've done a great job of over the last 40 years, I mean, leaps and bounds of development in the graphic space, most of their systems run on the CPU, which is to say that they run in sequence. They're more or less mathematical operations that happen one after another. And that's just not how a GPU works. A GPU is meant to calculate every single pixel that's on your screen all at once simultaneously. And in order to do that, they all have to have independent expression, the way that you would have like a math equation that just tells you a whole line, like, to call back to middle school algebra, you have y equals mx plus b, right? And you put in the equation for that. And then for any value of x or for any value of y, where that line is going to be. And it's graphed all at once. You don't say, all right, graph this point and then graph this point and then graph this point. And so that's where the technical challenge really comes in with the Wayward Realms is how do you take some of these systems that are so established in the games industry, ways of building an entire RPG world, and put it into this entirely different processor, this entirely different way of thinking mathematically about this, so that you can calculate all of the world population at once, as if they were pixels on a screen. How do you express that in a way that is, mathematically sound, algorithmically sound, so that all of these people have a real-time movement, they have a real personality that they can connect to, they have clothing that is unique, and it's persistent. And one of the things that I think a lot of people who follow the Wayward Realms are constantly thinking is, when are we going to get some gameplay? When are we going to get some footage of this stuff? When are we going to see screenshots? Oh my God. And the thing is, when you calculate everything all at once, it is awful and doesn't work until it does. There's no, like in the CPU development realm, okay, we have this particular system and it's in place, and then we're going to develop this system. That's not how development happens at the Wayward Realms. It's all of the NPCs look insane, or they all are coherent and they're all interactive and they're all, nice to talk to for. And once you have that, then you have unlimited gameplay footage because you have unlimited gameplay. There are so many people that you can interact with, and they all have, this unique way of expressing that is mathematically and algorithmically sound. And that's sort of the challenge that we're at now. That's like, okay, we have all of the art. We know how we would make this game if we wanted to make it run on the CPU, if we wanted to make it procedural, if we wanted to make it sequential. But that's not what we're trying to do. So that's the current hill to climb over that takes all of that, giving people personalities and all of that, and makes it actually interactive.
Now, speaking about interaction, and maybe Victor, you can pick up on this one. How does the Wayward Realms tell stories through the environment? How exactly is that going to be achieved?
Well, actually, I'd like to toss this one over to Kai because he's very passionate about this subject, and it wouldn't be right for me to take it from him.
Okay.
Well, sorry, listeners, you have to listen to me talk a little bit more. Okay, so in order to talk about this, I want to pull from an AD&D module here. This is the Halls of Ardenvool. It's one of the rare moments in the AD&D first edition gaming space where we've gotten a whole new module to play with. Most of us who are into this game have to go dig up things from the 80s and 90s and then try to understand most of what's written there, because the common sense of how the game was played was unconscious to most people at the time, and they didn't write it down. So the introduction to the Halls of Ardenvool, you have just left this town of Gosterwick, which is essentially a frontier town in what you can imagine a sort of untamed West kind of scenario, but of course in a medieval backdrop. And there is this great noble woman who has reinvigorated this town with economic connections, and she has brought a group of knights that are now watching over the people there. And the entire purpose is that it is next to this mass historical ruin that used to be a proud place for the Arcantian people, which are the people who she belongs to and who now inhabit this area, and they want to restore it to its former glory. Of course, this is an AD&D module, so it's been, since it's been abandoned and since it has turned into ruins, it's been filled with ghosts and wizards and orcs and all of that stuff. But here's what you first see as a player. You leave Gosterwick and you start traveling along an old imperial road that, as you get further and further from the town, slowly dissolves from cobblestone pieces into shale and finally nothing more than dirt and sand. Alongside you runs what the Arcantians call the Swift River, so named because the waters that run along it move so quickly that it is essentially impossible to cross. In the distance, there is a cliff face that stretches up 1,500 feet into the sky. And even from this far away, you can see that running the entire length of it is a colossus rendered in stone of a woman in plate armor who kneels on one knee and holds out an open hand, palm up. And across from her, also rendered, is a huge stone figure wearing flowing robes covered in arcane symbols. All the way above both of their heads, at the edge of the horizon, you can see dotted along that knife's edge are the small points of the ruined city that lays beyond, should you find a way to climb up to the top of it.
I want to roll perception.
Unfortunately, the only thing that you perceive is that there are small animals nearby. Anyway, this sort of an opening scene, it does so much to set the stage, and yet nobody has said anything. You haven't had to have any of the history told to you by a character. You just are looking upon this cliff, and it's at least what registered in my mind the first time I read this. And I'm sure everybody has a different take on it, but you can see the very literal height of the empire that used to be here. An empire that is now one noblewoman and a small set of knights who have essentially shored up in a frontier town that you were just at, that's mostly marked by how completely lacking it is in every way. She wants to restore the old glory. And then you see the literal height, 1,500 feet, of a glorious woman in armor and this arcane magic user who's a master of the forces of the universe. That is environmental storytelling as clear as I can represent it. That sort of ability to walk into a space and understand immediately, just through your senses, all of the narrative themes that are present in that story is the aim. And that's what we're trying to resolve on the art team. How do we take the just unbelievably insurmountable amount of lore that the lore designers and the narrative team have produced and represent it visually in the landscape? Like, what sort of marks does the world of splendor leave on the environment that's around them? Because as human beings, we sense that stuff immediately. You walk in, you know that humans have been here, that a place has been developed. You know sort of the general feeling of the society that was once there. How do we put that into the game so that you can experience it at a glance?
I mean, anyone else knocked out here by this? I mean, wow. Kai, thanks for bringing me through that. I mean, that was absolutely incredible. I can imagine that podcast listeners were, imagining this in their heads, and I mean, I'm literally like at a loss for words based on what you described and how you described it, and just absolutely breathtaking and phenomenal. Thank you very much for that, Kai. Incredible. And this is the approach that's happening here in the Wayward Realms. Just phenomenal. I hate to move on, but I kind of need to. Like I said, I wish I could roll perception here. Victor, I want to jump over to you again on the 80s inspiration and the aesthetic from that. Speaking to like cultural identifiers, like like clothing and architecture, maybe even heraldry or weapon and armor styles. How can you pull that aesthetic into those things? And Eugenia, on your side of it too, I want to maybe hear a little bit from how you do this as well. But I want to start with Victor on that.
Sure. Well, I think like one of those big things first is identifying those like sort of unique traits to that like old 80s style, and not necessarily like just in the artwork, but like in the pop culture also. Like I was saying, like the the kind of haircuts you might see on the fantasy side, like maybe like you see a lot of like spikes on armor, and like while we don't want to have like giant 2-foot spikes, like maybe we have like little almost decorative kind of studs to these things, right? So just kind of try to break down those elements and see like, yeah, that's something that like really reminds me of that old 80s fantasy style. And then it's sort of like assigning that to the different cultures and factions and things like that. Like orcs tend to wear more of the scale mill stuff that, you definitely saw that in the 80s. Like a lot of the knights had like scale mill hauberks and stuff like that. So like we decided to make it more of an orcish thing. They have the scale, Splendor has the full plate kind of thing. And they're both the heavy armor, so they're both going to give you a lot of protection. So it's not like one's just at a disadvantage, right? And it really is just kind of that balancing of like, what traits can I assign to this culture to make it uniquely that culture, and really just going from there and just expanding on those themes.
Eugenia, how do you? What's your side of this from tech artistry? How do you take this direction, this aesthetic, regarding clothing and architecture, heraldry, or weapon and armor styles? How do you kind of work with that?
Yeah, so I'm glad that I'm being balanced out, because I actually like to make systems out of things. I hear something like, oh, we need heraldry sets, we need culture sets. And I'm thinking already, well, how do I incorporate that? Does everyone have 2 shoulder pad slots? And then like, how do I make it so that it doesn't look always the same, but it's purple or something like that? So I need to break it down so that it can be modular, so that we don't have to make everything unique, everything fresh, because that's work for hundreds of people for many, many years. But at the same time, it shouldn't look like it's only copy-paste. And I have several tools at my disposal, of course. We can make, let's just stay with the shoulder pad. We can make 10 shoulder pads. We can stretch and squash the shoulder pads. We can give them different materials. But I can also go in and be like, well, this one is masked in such and such way. And furthermore, it's like, oh, but this person doesn't even have both shoulder pads. Or like, if we could, like, again, there's always hard limitations, like we don't have infinite time. Unfortunately, we're all mortal. But like we had discussions with the design team. I love them so much. We had discussions like, well, you should be able to lose limbs too. Customization. But it's a nightmare. To make it happen. And a different example is I would like to add when it's like environmental storytelling. From a systems way of thinking, I'd be like, well, if you're coming to a dangerous dungeon entry, or if you're seeing a deity that is dangerous, a statue or something, there is a zone of silence. But if you do that always, it's like a reverse jump scare, because you're like, oh wow, so the game wants me to feel this and that here. So we can't just blindly make it systematic. But then again, it's like, I think sound design is a cheat code for atmosphere.
You know, Eugenia, I want to touch on something that you had mentioned. You said you're all mortal. No one's got, infinite time. You know, it's a small art team. How do you and Kai utilize technology to, overcome obstacles that crop up from just being a small team?
Kai is the big tech. I'm just like the small tech at the moment, but I'm learning. And I personally think we have so many great tools. The solutions to make it happen as a small team are surprisingly analog, because it boils down to having the logistics and processes in place, the communication, because we cannot afford to not be efficient. So it's like, it's surprisingly old-fashioned what we have to do, like really making sure, like, especially as a mostly remote team, we need to talk to each other. We need to know where the others are at. And I think the team's doing a great job at that. And yeah, I really do think also, apart from that, the reusability of assets is also important. Or just we have this pressure, we have to innovate. Maybe I can't give you a list like what exactly we will do, but we will have to climb that mountain. And we just have this pressure, like we have to find the solutions. And we have to try to find ways to use everything we've got. And that's also the thing. It's not like we don't have to become the perfect game, but we have to become the perfect game that this specific team can make. So it's not about like chasing whatever impossible standard. It's about like really looking inside, like who are we? What can we do?
I love that. You know, I say this often about my wife. You know, you may not be the perfect woman, but you're perfect for me. And
it sounds really dangerous, not gonna lie.
You know, it may not be the perfect game, but it's the best you guys can put forward, and utilizing all of the tools that you have, plus some ingenuity. Victor, you hear some horror stories coming out of some really large game studios. I mean, we all remember our favorite game studios and where they started out. Eugenia, beautiful list of some of your favorite RPGs, from 20 years ago. That particular studio was just a fan favorite, and then it got very big. And then it seems like the quality seems to, and this, that studio is not unique, of course. This happens all the time. Studios start off small, then they get big, and then quality seems to dip. And I think you really hit on something there, Eugenia, about, communication. Victor, we kind of hear, these horror stories all the time where studios get big, and then, quality seems to just sort of slip away. And I think, communication gets lost as things get big. I mean, can you talk a little bit about maybe some of your experience here with the team and the communication, and just some innovation there, and in keeping things on track and in scope and on target at all?
Yeah, well, it's certainly a big challenge for us, and maybe it's in a way similar to what like those big studios have to deal with, because since we are a big remote, or not a remote team, we can't just lean over to the desk next to us and say, hey, what do you think about this? Does this work with what you're working on? Right.
Yeah.
We have to have, first of all, a team that's very comfortable talking with one another. You have to know your coworkers, you have to know what they're working on, and you have to be willing to reach out when you need either like their assistance or just their opinion on something, see if something works, if it's in line with design and stuff like that. And luckily we do have a really good team that's very passionate about it, but it's still a struggle, and there have been times when we've not communicated well and things haven't worked correctly, and we've had to say, like sort of figure it out again, and just reinforce that, like, that communication is key, especially for our team in this remote environment that we live in pretty much. So I can see, like, definitely, like with the big studios, you get too many people, it's hard to get a hold of somebody in charge of something, right? And so you can't have that easy communication. And one thing, like Kai and the rest of our leads, like, they're so good at just like being there for their teams and for other teams too. Like, if you need something, reach out to me, right? That's sort of the big thing we're always pushing. Don't hesitate. It can be just a simple direct message, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And I mean, that's really it. Like, that's the core of how we'll find successes, through communication.
Yeah, communication is so key, and I think that gets lost as teams, as corporations get bigger and bigger. You start talking less between departments and start adopting ticketing systems, and maybe that works fine for a while, but then now the communication is completely broken down because departments get siloed. And you put in a ticket for a specific art piece to happen, and it comes out completely wrong. Now you got to do it again, and that's time lost and money wasted. And this is how these things come to be. Okay, well, let's move over to our gameplay section. I know it's a little silly to have a gameplay section at this stage in the game, but I like to start things nice and early. So each episode, I and our guests will be sharing one or two fun gameplay stories with you, dear listener. However, since the game's not out yet, we are going to be discussing some fun development stories, some behind the scenes stuff. So this month's question for Victor, Kai, then Eugenia. How are you getting prepped for early access? What's, maybe something today, or maybe something this week, or even late last week? Early access is coming real quick. What's something that you can share that you were doing to get prepped for early access?
Well, I think from me, because I'm not really in engine, and I'm more like, the production side, making sure everything's, running on all cylinders and everybody's communicating, like I said earlier, is super important. But one of the things we're kind of prepping to do here soon is to start reaching out to our Kickstarter backers and start working on those characters, the NPCs, Inquisitors, Lore Masters, the Nymphs, the Malice, and start getting their information on it, start getting a little back and forth conversation, and really narrowing those characters. Victoria is obviously very involved in that, and you guys, maybe by the time this comes out, we might have already kicked it off, but if not, probably really soon. So that's something I think is exciting. I really want to see all the stuff that the community's come up with. Like we mentioned on the last episode, the community has been involved so much already in helping make this game a reality, including just adding lore and things like that ideas and things for the game. So I'm really excited to see what kind of unique things they bring to all of these characters.
Kai, what about you? What's some things that you're getting ready on your side there for early access?
Well, when we first started working on all of this, when we sort of entered the production phase around the time that I joined the team, we had to define on the art side a lot of really specific detail. What does a shirt look like? What does a pair of pants look like? What does a door look like? What does a windowsill, a wall, the inside of a house for a given city? And you start building all of these assets, you start modeling these things, and finding textures for them, or programmatically building your own textures. But you eventually get to the point where you have to transition from there, from defining specifics to bringing the whole world together. And this more or less connects to both of the things that Victor and Eugenia were saying. Victor was talking about how we work together as a team, and Eugenia was talking about the tools that we're making. When you are working at the level of a wall of a house or a door or what roof tiles you're going to use, and you want to build something the size of the Wayward Realms, your brush bristles are too small for the task at hand. And so a lot of the tools that we've been developing more recently are centered around, okay, how do we get to the point where you can swipe a brush across a landscape and you can create a particular biome, or you can create a certain city that has a particular layout. We want to be able to paint in broad brush strokes so that we can fill in the canvas, so that we can then move back in and then work on the details. And one of the amazing things about using something like Unreal Engine is that it has a whole bunch of what are essentially procedural tools, although we don't use them that way. But what they can do is you can give them a lot of information about the thing that you want to paint. So to give you an example, one of the systems that we developed recently is for iJar being able to say what things grow where in the foliage layer of the island. So some places have trees, some places just have bushes, some places just have rock, some places are next to a lake or a little stream of water, because they're on that bank up against water, they have different stuff growing there. Well, again, if you work at the purely asset level, you're going to be going in and placing trees one by one, and you have a massive island. That's going to take our entire team years to finish. Yeah. Also, if you go on the pure procedural route, which is what a lot of game studios do, and you just code up a solution that says, okay, well, if you encounter this boundary as you scan over the world, the topology of the world, put these type of plants there with this sort of percentage distribution. You'll have a 10% chance to have a tree and a 50% chance to have a bush, and the remaining percent chance is like a little tuft of grass. And that's something that we all have seen in games, where you walk into a field and you're like, this somehow, even though it's different, even though it's unique, it feels the same. Every single image of a TV that is tuned to static and just has black and white fuzz on it is technically completely unique. But every single one of them is also the same, because they're just random in the same way. And so we've developed tools that are halfway between that. So right now we have these two tools that I mentioned. One of our cities is called Belfer Parva, which anybody who's following the lore is familiar with. And we spent a lot of time figuring out, what do the doors look like and the walls and the roofs and whatnot? What are some ranges of how many stories houses here would have? And then we developed all of that into a brush that an artist can use. So they open up Unreal Engine, they literally click a paintbrush like you would in Photoshop, they paint part of the surface, and then as they do so, because we've programmed in all of these art constraints, they get a starting point of, okay, here are all of these buildings that are composed of the walls and doors and roofs that you would expect buildings to be composed of here, but they're painted by hand, so they don't have the random noise generation. So you have decided to paint where they go, where are the buildings, where are the streets. But then you have a whole high-level city painted out, and then you can go in and you can adjust things and make it unique. And so that's basically the sort of transition point that we're at with the art team, is how do we take all of these very detailed brushes that we've been deciding on the specifics with, and grow them up into these big brushes like the ones that we can now use for cities or for landscapes, where, you know, you paint part of Ijar, and then when the game runs, that's a forest and it looks the way a forest should. But it's not just procedurally generated. It's, you know, it has some human touch to it. So it is more interesting than just randomness from point A to point B of the percentages of plants that a forest might have.
Okay. Again, really great points again, Kai. I didn't think about the what you had mentioned about the static. I thought that was quite profound, actually. I thought that was very good, because you're right. When you're looking at it, I don't want to belabor the subject, but you know, there's a lot of truth in what you were saying about the randomness being different but feeling the same all at the same time. Eugenia, what are you doing to get prepped for early access on your side?
I'm kind of glad that I'm the last one answering, because at first I thought, hey, this is not a question I can answer. Because in my head, early access as a milestone belongs to the players, actually, not to us developers. I think that is because right now, while we're in production, my job is to do the best job that I can, that everything is as good as I can push it until early access, but it doesn't stop there, because once it's out, there will be a barrage of more bug reports and the development will continue, because we're not done with early access. We have plans with Wayward Realms. So it's not really a milestone for me. It is important. No, it really is important. And I think the only preparation on my part is that I try to not burn the candles on both sides, because there needs to be energy on my part in case we have something big coming up around the release where it's like, okay, all hands on deck. We need to push something. Then I don't want to be burned out at that point. But other than that, I really think this one belongs to the players.
Yeah, well, equally profound. Thank you so much for that, Eugenia. I
think it might just be Eugenia's way of telling me and Kai, I'm not going to hit those milestones. We got plenty of time. Don't worry.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Yeah. Oh well.
That's an issue I have as well, with burning the candlestick on both sides. So yeah. Okay, so I know we've been going for a while. But we do have a couple of questions here from Discord. Everyone ready for that?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So this one comes from Gorgrith on art direction, and Gorgrith asks, there's plenty of UE5 games coming out nowadays, most of them on the higher end of graphics, but graphics and art direction are very different things. What is Wayward Realms doing to not just look good, but interesting and unique?
Well, in case you have not found a satisfactory answer to that question by everything that you've listened to so far, I can sum it up in a few words. One is, we're taking, as mentioned towards the beginning, a completely unique approach to developing this stuff, where most of our technical processes, most of our code, it runs on the GPU. We do everything simultaneously. We process, real lives. We try to make everybody look different from everybody else. To get a little bit more technical, we have, what you would consider a character creation system in a normal RPG that you've played, where maybe you have height and weight and a few simple sliders, and then maybe you can get relatively detailed, like you can adjust some of their facial features and things like that. We have those sliders for everything. We have built them into every system, every object. When we talk about a 3D asset in the Wayward Realms, nothing is static in this world. We have the ability to vary and shift and adjust and move sliders around and set tolerances for every single object that you encounter. And so one of the constraints that a lot of studios have when they are building out these Unreal Engine 5 games is that they focus on making something that looks really, really good, and then they end up essentially doing what is the artistic equivalent of like railroading their players, as a GM would do in AD&D. For anybody who's unfamiliar with the term, it's where you determine the outcomes of events ahead of time And then somebody just more or less plays through a story that you've pre-written. And if you're a really good railroading GM, you might give them the illusion of choice. This is as opposed to running things in a sandbox where players can go anywhere and do anything and break anything and encounter anybody, and anything can go any which way. So we are having to develop these systems, but we're also having to put some amount of faith into them. And I think this is where things get really risky. This is where all of us, even in the team, we get nervous and we kind of look at each other and think, is this going to work? Like, this has never been done before. Nobody builds a system and then just trusts it to make the game that they want to play, because they assume that all of the craft and effort and rigor that they've put into the thing that they've made is going to hold up over 10,000 iterations over 255 square kilometers. We don't have the time to look at that as developers in the level of detail that the player base is going to be able to see, right? And so what a lot of studios do to try to control that is to have absolute control over everything before it goes into the game. And we have, I would say, more guidance than control. And that just, I mean, the areas that we encounter when we see our own systems, of course, right now, early in development, we encounter a lot of broken places, but we also see places that all of us take screenshots of and share with each other and are like, oh my God, it can do this. This might work. These things are functional in a way that we didn't expect. And we see things that we don't see in other games. And that's going to come through when the players get their hands on this. Also, I'm sure a lot of memes are probably going to come through, because there's going to be things between early access and full release. There's a lot of years of development, so they're going to find that as well.
This next one comes from She Was Here on the art department. And just to kind of preface this, I think we've touched upon a lot of this, but I think we can sort of answer in a little bit of a different way. So the user asks, what is character customization looking like? What's the clothing looking like? How's the shift moving into an 80s, 90s art style coming along? What called the artist currently working on the team to join in the first place? So a couple of questions here. I think maybe, like I said, we kind of touched upon this, all of them, during the show, but character customizations is really, I don't think we hit on that yet. So maybe we can sort of focus in on that in particular. How is that how is character customization looking, and how is it coming along, and how is the approach in the art direction for character customization different than other games? Maybe Kai, you want to pick that up again, or Victor?
I want Eugenia to pick up this one. Eugenia.
I was also going to say we should toss that one over to Eugenia.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, and this is the moment to remind everyone that one of our Kickstarter promises was like, yeah, you have choice, and your choices matter. And that means, in my ears, like, you will have a lot of customization options, as many as I can cram in. It comes even down to things like, I want to have makeup. I want to have you being able to paint nail colors, although you probably won't ever see them because gloves are great for stats in battles, But I want people to have that. And in an ideal world, I want you to be able to go to a tailor in-game, and you're like, well, I used to be the Dark Knight. Now I want a little bit of an asymmetric barbarian look. And you can make it from things that you found, loot that you found. Hey, that would be so great. And even if we can't make this happen in early access, at least, if I try to push to that, if I fail, it will still be great. and yeah, so I take this really seriously. The player should feel awesome, should feel in control. But you also, if you want to look completely ridiculous, I want you to be able to do that too. Because it's your game.
Yeah, I love that. Some of the some of my favorite characters that I created for the first Dragon Age game, Dragon Age Origins, were my favorite because I made them just completely ridiculous looking. And then of course you've got this this ridiculous looking character, and then one of the NPCs comments on, how attractive you are, and it's a laugh riot. Yes. So
well, in our particular game, you could meet an NPC who's in exactly that.
Yeah.
So you can never know in this world. But also, I would like to say that we are not actually shifting in a different art direction. The 80s influence has always been there. We just had to clarify the statement. So it's not that we had to throw everything out. It's rather like, no, we're just clarifying. So in that regard, the switching over to the 80s style is going great. But also...
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add about the 80s influence, just in case that listeners are wondering now, we are aware that nobody can go back in the past and live in the past. That's not possible. That's why we're talking about an influence. So we're not necessarily trying to just we're just loading it up with pop culture references. And then in 30 years, nobody has any clue what we're talking about. But we're trying to strike a healthy balance there.
Got it. I like what you said about almost like a refinement. It's not like it's a total shift. You could see that in the new logo. If you look at the old logo, you could definitely see that there's an 80s style to the quality and texture of it, but the newer one definitely showcases that for sure. So I really like what you said about that, Eugenia. All right. Well, dear listener, we are here at the end of our journey, and I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank Eugenia and Victor and Kai as well for coming on. And you might be thinking, hey, this game sounds incredible. What can I do as a listener to push things forward? What can I do to help? Well, I'm glad you asked, dear listener. You could wish list the Wayward Realms on Steam. It's a huge help for the game. Certainly like, share, and smash that notification bell on YouTube at OnceLost Games, so you never miss not just a podcast episode, but you never miss any update that comes out on YouTube. Hey, we're not just on YouTube. We also have an audio only version of the show. You can find that on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you happen to listen to your podcast from. And if you're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you can give us a 5-star review. That certainly helps things out with the show. Hang out with us on Discord. You can find the link over at waywardrealms.com, and follow us on all social media at OnceLost Games. Thank you very much for everyone listening, downloading, commenting in the comments section here on YouTube. We always read all the comments and love what you folks have to say. We'll see you in all of our travels, and until then, happy exploring.